Hey everyone, welcome back for another Journey with Jesus devotion. Today we're reading through Matthew chapter 21, and there's a couple of important parables here. Jesus is actually in the final days of his life. Matthew's going to spend a significant portion of his letter walking us through those final days of Jesus' earthly life before the crucifixion. And Jesus here in Matthew 21, in one of his final encounters with those religious leaders, seeking to get them to understand who he is as the Messiah, that he is the fulfillment of all the Old Testament scriptures, that they should come and bow their lives before him as the Messiah. And in that effort, he tells two stories, two parables. One I want us to think about in our time is what is called the parable of the two sons. And to those religious leaders, Jesus tells this story. And he says, suppose there is a vineyard owner who's a father. And he goes to his two sons. He goes to the first son and he says, son, I want you to come work in my vineyard today. Would you respond to this invitation? And that first son says, no way, no how. I have no desire to respond to go work in your vineyard. The answer is a solid no. And yet, that first son has a change of heart, a change of mind. He ends up going to work in the vineyard. He responds to the father's invitation. That's the first son. Then there's another son. That father goes to him and says, son, would you come work in my vineyard today? Would you respond to this invitation? And that second son says, yeah, Dad, I'd love to. Count me in. I'll absolutely go do whatever it is you want me to do. And yet, that second son never moves. He never responds. He never does anything with the Father's invitation. Those are two sons. Jesus ends that parable, looks out at the religious audience before him, and asks this question: which of those two sons did his father's will? And the religious crowd knows the right answer. They say, well, it's the first son. It's the one who initially said he wouldn't, but then he did. Then Jesus makes this parable all the more personal to this religious audience and maybe for you and me today. He says, I assure you that tax collectors and prostitutes are entering the kingdom of God before you. What's he saying here? He's saying, well, tax collectors and prostitutes, some of the scum of the earth from this society's standpoint, they're like that first son. That early on they had no interest in God. They had no desire to respond to his invitation. They were going to live their own way, do their own thing by their own sinful desires. And yet, they've had a change of heart. They've come to hear the message of the kingdom of heaven. They've come to hear the message of Christ. And despite what their early answer was, they've had a change of mind. They're like that first son. Pharisees and scribes, religious leaders, you're a lot like that second son. In that, early on you told God you would do whatever he wanted you to do. Wherever he was moving, you were going to follow through with his invitation, with his will. And that father, Jesus is saying, has sent the Messiah. It's me. And yet you won't move. You won't change. You won't bow your lives. You're giving great lip service to God, but you won't give him life service. You won't come, bend the knee, bow the heart, and change your life in response to who I am as the Messiah. He tells this parable seeking to get them to understand that life in the Christian faith is more about what you say with your lips. It's about what you do with your life. May that be a helpful word for us today. That far too often it's easy for us, like these religious leaders, to give lip service of promising all the things we're going to do. But more importantly than that, life service. What are we actually doing? How are we actually responding with the content of our lives to the gospel, to Jesus Christ, to his invitation to us to come and follow him? Let me ask you as we close today, which of those two sons in this parable speaks more clearly of your life? I hope you'll find that answer. Bow your life to Jesus accordingly. We'll see you tomorrow. God bless.